is so good to see you guys, and so grateful for this chance to be together on what is sort of a fun weekend around Seattle. If you're a sports fan, you know today, of course, the Mariners actually have a chance to make the playoffs. Can you imagine? There is a God, friends. There is a God. Believe it. Believe it. I mean, the Sounders are right on the cusp of the playoffs. Next week, many of us excited. The Kraken finally begin their new adventures. Lots of exciting things going on, but some great things that I want to talk about today. And I'm so excited to be here with you now, those of you joining us online, of course, as well as those of you who are here on our Kirkland campus, because I think this series that we've been in, it's one of the most important ones we've done for a while, just to come together and clarify what it looks like to grow and follow and be part of the family of Jesus in our world. And so I'm glad you're here to be part of it. Now, several years ago, I had kind of a unique opportunity. I was invited to be part of a panel conversation of folks of different faith traditions around the world. This was actually quite some time ago. And there were four of us that were part of this panel. It was myself, there was a Muslim imam, a Hindu teacher, and a Jewish rabbi. And no, we didn't all walk into a bar. This is not a bad joke like that, all right? We sat down for a conversation. And it wasn't a debate. It was simply each of us answering in this forum some basic questions about what it was that we teach and believe. So each of us were asked the same sets of questions. Things like, what is your source of truth? How do you describe God? Who do you believe Jesus to be? How do human beings become right with God or deal with moral failure in their lives? It's fascinating to hear. And as you know, a lot of people have this idea that basically all the faith traditions in the world, on the surface there are differences, but at their core, they're the same, right? That they're just different roads to the same destination. But I'll tell you, from that conversation, it was crystal clear that the opposite is true. That any similarities, they're just on the surface, but at their core, these are fundamentally different things. But of course, that's a conversation for another day. The reason I bring it up is because before and after the panel, had some amazing conversations with these folks who became friends. Particularly one man named Rabbi Tom. Kind of a unique guy, the only rabbi I've ever met who had his own rap album. I don't know how common that is for rabbis, but anyway, this was a long time ago, but I will never forget, as Tom and I were sitting there talking, he said, it seems to me the difference between Christianity and Judaism is simple. He said, Christianity is a belief system, while Judaism is more of a lifestyle. He explains, I've got a lot of folks in my synagogue who don't even really believe in God, or don't really have any real convictions spiritually, but they still stay kosher, they still follow the Sabbath guidelines, they still celebrate the festivals, just because it's part of their way of life. It's their lifestyle. He said, in his experience, Christianity, on the other hand, he'd met lots of Christians who claimed to believe very deeply in God, believed Jesus is the Son of God, that he came to die for their sins. They consider themselves Christians, but for so many of them, it doesn't actually show up in the way that they live. So to him, Christianity was mainly a belief system. It's just something in your head, whereas his faith tradition was more of a lifestyle. Even if there was nothing in your head or heart, you just did this stuff. And as much as I wanted to disagree with him, I knew exactly what he meant. Because there are lots of times in my own life, and I've seen in many other lives, where those of us who consider ourselves Christians, we claim to believe things, but it doesn't always actually show up in our lives. See, in this series, Who Are You Following? We're saying that's not the kind of people we want to be. Not at North Shore. We want to be the kind of people who actually live out what we claim to believe. And so Scotty kicked us off a couple of weeks ago, challenging us to do more than just slap on the label of Christian or go through a few rituals, but to actually be disciples. And if you were here, you remember, we defined what a disciple is. A disciple is a person who has made a decision to learn how to be like Jesus by following Jesus. A disciple is someone who's integrating what it is they're learning and believing into how they're living, based on Jesus' example. And we've been walking through 4 components of what this looks like. This is how we live this out. day-to-day, friends, here's the things. We spend time with God, we connect in community, we serve others, and we live generously. These are the things we're learning to integrate into our daily lives so that we continue to grow more and more as followers of Jesus. We see each of these things in the life of Jesus. He did this stuff. And so as people following after him, we want to learn to do it too. So last week we talked about this idea of spending time with God. And so many of us took, as Brandon mentioned earlier, this unfollow challenge, where we sort of stepped away from some of the influences or voices in our world, whether it's through social media, whether it's through different news channels. And instead of listening to those voices and taking our cues there, we said we're going to prioritize spending time in the Bible, listening to what God has to say, being intentional about spending that time with him. Just quick show of hands in the room here. How many actually tried that in some way? You experimented with it? Yeah, a number of you. We had so many people that texted in, that let us know they were doing that. And I know it was hard for some people. We had people who were reaching out and asking, hey, how long does the experiment actually last, right? Like, technically, does it run from when the sermon was to a week after the sermon? Was it over at midnight on Saturday? Like, how exactly did this work? And let me say, if you were up at 12:01 this morning so you could jump back on Facebook, you have a problem. All right? A serious, serious problem. Anyway, I'm thrown off by that because I'm realizing there are people who actually did that. I'm sorry. We said we want to be, if you were part of this, we sent texts each morning, and maybe you got these texts if you signed up last week, these little reminders to just spend some time with God. To read a little text from the Bible, to reflect on what it had to say, to then spend a few moments praying. And think about this. Let's just be honest. Which do you think is a better use of 15 minutes in your day? Scrolling through the latest posts on Instagram, or spending a little bit of time with God and his word? Friends, that's a no-brainer. And it can make such a difference. It did for me. I hope it did for you. These are rhythms I try to have in my life all the time, but to pull back some of those other voices in a more intense way was so freeing to focus instead on spending that time with God. Well, today I want to talk about the next of these essentials. We mentioned it earlier. It's connecting in community. Connecting in community. If you've ever thought about this, but there are certain things in life you cannot do by yourself. Now, some of them are things you wouldn't want to do. Like Stephen Bolt on our team reminded me this morning, you cannot lick your elbow by yourself. I'm not sure how he knows that. I know many of you are curious to try. Some of you are actually trying right now. You don't need to have anybody else lick your elbow for you. You cannot do it, though, by yourself. But there are other things. You can't play football by yourself. I guess you throw the ball up in the air, but it's nowhere near the game, right? This is something coming up later this month. You can't trick or treat by yourself. Although some of you parents pretend to do it by stealing the candy out of the kid's basket, right? You just steal it. You can't give yourself a hug. I mean, you can throw your arms around yourself, but it's just not the same. Similarly, you can't have your first kiss by yourself. Well, let's be honest. Some of us maybe tried with a mirror in 5th grade. Some of you did that. Scotty tried. I'll just tell you that. He tried. There are other things. You can't skydive by yourself. So I go, sure you can. I've seen if you log enough hours, you can actually jump by yourself. But friends, somebody's still got to drive and land the plane, right? You can't do that by yourself. And finally, you can't eat an entire large pizza by yourself. Actually, I personally know that's not true. Actually, I'll take that one back. I should say you shouldn't eat an entire large pizza by yourself, all right? Let's clarify that one. See, there are some things you can't do by yourself. And here's why I bring this up. You can't follow Jesus alone. You can't follow the example. Say, you want to do the things he taught you to do and do that alone. Here's what I'm saying. First, it's not what he taught or modeled. Jesus was very intentional about spending time with a close circle of friends, his disciples. Now, there were times when Jesus would go off by himself. He'd spend times of solitude. That can be part of spending time with God. That's a beautiful, healthy thing. But again and again, Jesus is hanging out with his disciples. He's serving with his disciples. He's eating with his disciples. When Jesus was thinking about how to extend his movement or his dream beyond his physical life on this earth, he did one thing. He didn't start a country. He didn't form an army. He didn't start a university or a corporation. He started a small group. A small group with a very simple plan. Mark chapter 3, verse 13 and following. It says, Jesus went up to a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might what? Be with him. That he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. He settles on these 12 guys and designates them as apostles. And the plan was they would be with him. And as they're with him, he would send them out. Now, why did he do it this way? See, I think it's because Jesus knew that's where lives are changed. That's how characters get shaped. So from the very beginning, this Jesus movement was a small group movement. And the main curriculum was to be with him. To be with him. When they failed, he'd be with them. When they tried to serve, he'd be with them. They'd learn together, study together, pray together, argue together, forgive together, and Jesus would be with them. And it wasn't that Jesus would do all the cool stuff and the rest of them would watch. They learned to do the things Jesus did by doing them with him, by doing them together. When they were discouraged, when they were confused, he was with them to help. He was with them to celebrate when they got something right. He was with them to clean up the messes when they got things wrong. They would walk through life together. That was Jesus' plan, to be with Jesus. So I can't say, I want to live after the example of Jesus and do it alone, because Jesus didn't do it alone. And second, there are so many things that Jesus taught us to do that you just can't do by yourself. Now, there may be some things you can do on your own, but again and again and again, Jesus said to his disciples to do certain things that require relationships. In John 15, listen to what he says. Jesus speaking, he says, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you." Then he sums it up, verse 17. "This is my command, love each other." You can't do that by yourself. You just can't do it. Other places, Jesus teaches his followers, forgive each other. You can't do that alone. Serve one another. Remember what Jesus said, the greatest two commandments of all were to love God and to love people. You can't do both of those things alone. In fact, if you step back and you look at the entire New Testament, there's a list, by some counts, 59 different commands in the New Testament that are known as the one another's. They're this list of all the things we're supposed to do as followers of Jesus with one another. Commands like pray for each other, encourage one another, be patient with one another. These are commands in the Bible. And Jesus says, if you're my friends, you'll do what I teach. None of them are things you can do by yourself. So, Jesus modeled doing things together. Jesus taught life together. So let me ask you, are you doing it? Are you connected intentionally in community? Now, if you've been around North Shore any period of time, you know we live this out in little communities we call life groups. And most people are familiar with these. We talk about them often. But I want to get just very practical by talking through a couple of questions around this. First, maybe this isn't obvious. What is a life group? A life group, it's a little community of people who are learning to follow Jesus together. They're made up of all kinds of people, different ages, different backgrounds, but their goal is to learn to follow Jesus together, to take this out of belief into a way of life. Now, most life groups meet in homes. Some of them will meet here on campus. Some of them meet online. There are those communities. And let me just be really clear about something, because sometimes people ask about this. Life groups are the primary vehicle and environment for spiritual growth here at North Shore. And the reason for that is because it was the primary format that Jesus used for his disciples. Like I said, he didn't start a class or a university or an army. He started a group, and they learned to be with Jesus while being with each other. So for us, life groups are our primary strategy for discipleship, for spiritual growth. And I know different churches do this different ways. And I also know life groups aren't perfect. Sometimes they can be messy, but sometimes it's in that messiness that we actually learn to do things like forgive each other and encourage each other and pray for each other. And this brings me to a second very practical question. What happens in a life group? What do these people even do, right? Because I know especially folks new to all this, it's a little scary. Like, you mean I actually have to go to somebody's house? What do they do in there? Like, is it weird? Like, what happens? Well, our life groups try to do the same kinds of things we see in Jesus' life group. They learn together. Of course, they listen to Jesus in person. We study from what God's given us in his word. Most of our groups, they dig deeper into whatever it is we discuss here in the weekend message. There's an extra little video that they'll watch together with some questions and a guide to kind of dig deeper and actually live this stuff out. Other groups, they use just some phenomenal resources that we have a subscription to through a group called Right Now Media, just world-class content for folks that want to study a specific Bible book or different themes or topics from Scripture. We have groups that are known as wholeness groups, which are designed for folks who are looking to overcome some struggle potentially in their lives, deal with things like grief or addiction or other kinds of issues they're struggling with. There are other groups like Alpha that are designed for people who aren't yet even believers, but are exploring faith and want to know more about the ideas of following Jesus. There's some groups that come together to talk about some of the big, challenging social issues and how to approach those as followers of Jesus. Other very practical experiences, like how to manage your money in a way that makes sense and so on. So Jesus and his disciples, they learned together, but they did another thing. They served together. That's part of our life groups as well. Many of our groups serve regularly together. Some help out at local food pantries, or they support international ministry partners, or they help foster families in our community. Perfect example of this is what David talked about earlier, this packing party event coming up on September 23rd. It's such a great way to serve together as a group because we can do so much more together. 10,000 packs is a little nuts. To do that in one day? But when all of us come together as families and groups and part of this community, we can make amazing things happen together. So groups learn together, they serve together, of course they pray together. And let's be honest, who wouldn't like to have some people praying for them in their lives? That happens in groups. And of course, groups often eat together, right? Maybe I should have just started with that one because some of you are like, sign me up, all right? There's eating involved? Yes, there is. I've visited many of the groups. Many of them eat very well, actually. Because there's something about eating together that helps us connect. Again, frequently in the Bible, we see Jesus eating with his disciples. And so lots of our groups do that as well. It's just part of connecting and doing life together. Now, here's another question. This one's very different. What kills a life group? Now, here's why I bring this up, because some of you that aren't in groups, you're wondering what the experience is like, but many of you are in groups. And I want to be upfront about this, both for those looking at groups and for those already in them. What helps a group go well, and what can cause it to struggle? Well, one way a group can struggle is if people bring unrealistic expectations. Sometimes people come and they expect that they'll just become magically best friends with everybody in the group, right? And I'll tell you, some of my best friends are people that I met in groups that I was a part of. But can I promise you, your best friend, you will meet your best friend there in a life group? I can't promise you that. But think about this. Which scenario do you think you have a better chance of actually making some friends? Jumping into a life group or sitting in a chair or just watching online? It's a no-brainer. You never know the kinds of people you will meet and the friendships that may develop if you actually step in and give it a try. Another way to kill a group is just keep it at surface conversations. Just keep it shallow. I'll tell you, nothing kills a group like a bunch of people who pretend that their lives are perfect. Part of the power of a life group is to be a place where you can open up about the challenges in your life, where you can experience help and encouragement. You can do the same for others. Now, of course, this idea of community is something we talk a lot about around here. And sometimes when we talk about it, we sort of speak of it and sort of sell the idea of community, tell you all the wonderful benefits that come. And it's pretty remarkable when you stop and think about it, right? There's scientific studies that shows that people with meaningful relationships and connections like this, they live happier lives, they live longer lives, and they find the needs in their life better met, better satisfied. I can show you literally secular, non-religious studies that prove all those things are true. But in this series, we're reminding ourselves, following Jesus isn't just about the wonderful benefits he can give me in my life. Following Jesus, it's saying, you are my teacher. I am your student. If you ask me to do something as your disciple, you're the boss. I will do it. See, if you're serious about being a disciple of Jesus, this is part of what that means. It means spending time with God, and it means connecting in community. And here's the beautiful thing, and this is just God's goodness in our lives. These things that Jesus tells me to do, you find out they actually aren't burdens. They're blessings. I'll tell you, life groups have been a blessing in my life. I don't know where I would be personally without life groups in my life. It's made all the difference in the world. Because here's the truth about me. As much as I'm tempted to pretend that I can handle all this myself, I've learned I can't. I need community. Following Jesus is not easy, friends. I need other people to help me keep going, to hold on when it would be so much easier to just give up. It's true in my spiritual life. Can I tell you as a husband, it's true in my marriage. 2 weeks ago, Lori and I got away. We celebrated 25 years of marriage, which was a blast. And most of those years have been awesome. Keyword most, all right? Because there have been some dogs in there too, if I'm perfectly honest with you, all right? And I'll tell you, if it hadn't been for life groups in my life, in our lives, I don't know if I'd still be wearing this ring. I don't know if we'd still be married. I think back over other challenges in our life, whether it was parenting, whether it was going through job transitions. I mean, the list goes on and on in our lives. It was groups of friends that we were doing life with that got us through, that prayed for us, that encouraged us, people that we were able to do the same for them as well. See, no matter who you are or what stage of life you're in, the truth is we need each other in our lives. I was recently talking to a young couple here at North Shore, Chris and Kate. They moved from the Midwest, where they were close to family and familiar with friends, all the way out here to Seattle. And they arrived in the Northwest at the beginning of March 2020. Anybody remember what happened in early March of 2020? Does it ring a bell for anyone? It's the first week of the pandemic here. In fact, they arrived the week that everything shut down. So here they are in this new city. They don't know anybody. They're hours and hours by plane from anybody that they know, friends and family. And so what do? One of the first things they started doing was looking for a church. And pretty soon they found North Shore Online. They're probably watching right now, actually. They began watching regularly. But pretty soon they realized they were longing for more than just watching a service, either in a chair or on a screen. They really wanted to connect. They felt isolated and wanted people around them. And so they reached out and they got connected to one of our life groups. These met online. And as we talked about their experience this week, they told me what a lifeline that has been for them. The difference that that's made. We talked about the joy of getting to know some people, still online, but still connected. People who know and care about them and who they now know and care about. As we talked, one admitted they're more of an introvert, the other admitted they're more of an extrovert. Any other couples like that out there? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah? But both of them acknowledged how essential the group had been in keeping them grounded and keeping them going through the challenges last year. They said, it's been good for our soul, they said. And we need that, friends. It's true early in life when you make a big move or in a new area. Friends, it's even more true later in life. And I got to see that this last week. How powerful a life dedicated to community, the blessing that comes from that. This past Wednesday, a good friend of mine died, very unexpectedly. Most of you, many of you will know him. If you've been on our Kirkland campus, you've probably seen him out in the lobby. His name is Gary Minchell. Some of you might know him as the suit guy. You know who I'm talking about? You're here on our campus. Gary'd be hanging out in the lobby, always happy to talk. This is him with his wife, Lorraine. Gary liked to wear a suit on Sundays, which was great. And they've been part of the North Shore family for decades. Years ago, he actually even worked on staff here. Well, early Wednesday morning, Gary had a heart attack at his home, and he died. And I went over to the house that morning, and just in the time I was there, I was blown away by the outpouring of love and support that was flooding in for Lorraine and the family. Literally, people from around the world were reaching out to express their grief, to let Lorraine and her family know how much Gary meant to them and how much they loved him. That couple has been intentional about building community and friendships. For years, they've been part of a life group here at North Shore. Sometimes they were leading, sometimes they were just participants. They built community with international partners around the world. This was a key part of their lives. And in this hard time, that community has stepped up to throw their arms around that family, to hold them up while they grieve. I mean, they've been overwhelmed with notes and calls and meals and emails and all this stuff. People stepping up to say, we love you and you loved us so well. To let them know they're loved. See, friends, those are the kinds of returns that come when you invest in community. And I'll tell you, I don't care who you are, I don't care what stage of life you're in, or even how strong you think you might be. There are times in everyone's life when you just need somebody. When we need each other. Someone once said, friends make the good times twice as sweet and the hard times half as painful. Friends, it's true. To share and celebrate together only amplifies the joy, doesn't it? And to cry and grieve together, there's something about doing it with people that you know and love that can make all the difference. Because in community, we celebrate together, we laugh together, but we also cry together. We grow together. We serve together. It's where we take what we believe and put it into practice. In fact, listen to what the Apostle John said. He was one of Jesus' original small groups, that little band of 12 disciples. He wrote this, if we love our brothers and sisters who are believers, it proves that we had passed from death to life. Dear children, let's not merely say we love each other. Let's show the truth by our actions. Our actions will show that we belong to the truth, so we will be confident when we stand before God. It's not just say we love each other. Let's actually do it. And I'll tell you, Gary Minshall, he did more than talk about love. He showed it. In all those years of loving others, people responded with love right back. I want that to be true of me, friends. I don't want this to just be a belief system. I want it to be a way of life, and I want to show it in the way I interact with others. Don't you? So here's the challenge. Throughout this series, we've been giving each other a little homework, a little challenge, experiment to see what this might look like in our lives. Spending time with God, connecting in community, serving others, living generously. And many of you, again, were part of that Unfollow challenge last week. I know a lot of folks who said, I'm sticking with it. I loved last week. To have a break from all the noise was glorious. So here's the challenge today. I want to challenge everyone in this room and everyone watching online. Jump into a life group for the next 2 months. I know that's a big ask. I know that's a big challenge. We believe that much in the power of that experience. It's what Jesus showed. It's what Jesus taught. Even if it's just to try it, even if it's just to kick the tires for 8 weeks. Now, these groups meet on all different days of the week and all different parts of the area. There are groups meeting online for those who need that. If you're on our Kirkland campus today, you probably noticed on the way in, out there in the lobby, giant silver letters that spell the word groups. I'm so desperately want to shuffle those around. We'll do that all day probably to spell other words. So if you have any ideas, let me know. But there will be members of our life group team that will be hanging out there in the lobby who would love to help you figure out which groups are available, what might work with your schedule, and help you get connected right here and now. And of course, if you're joining us online, you can go to northshore.church/groups, and you'll see the whole list of group offerings that are available there. Dozens of them, different nights of the week, all over the place. Some are meeting in person, others are meeting online. So no matter where you're coming from, there's a place for you. And if you are in a life group, because I know we have a lot of folks there, I want to challenge you to lean in. Look for ways, actively look for ways to pray for and support each other. Continue to be honest about the things that might be struggles in your life. Stretch yourself by maybe serving together. Invite someone to join your group that you know isn't connected. See, friends, as the Apostle John said, we don't want to just say we love each other. We want to show it. Because you cannot be a disciple of Jesus alone. He modeled it. He taught about it. Friends, the reality is every one of us, we need it. So what about you? In fact, would you bow your head with me? Let's pray about this right now. Just bow your head. God, I thank you. I thank you that you care. And I thank you for the way you know each of us one by one. But I thank you for the way you don't leave us one by one. You fold us into a family. And whether our families were good experiences or bad experiences, you invite us to be part of a new kind of community, a new kind of family, where we walk together, where we pray together, where we serve together, where we learn together, where we together learn to be with you. God, I thank you for the hundreds and hundreds of people who are part of this place who have found that in a life group. And I pray you'll give them the courage to continue to lean in, to go deeper, to live this out, to not just say they love each other, but to actually do it. But God, I also pray for those who are sitting on the outside and maybe they're just watching and life's busy and there's lots to think about and so on. But God, so many of the things we crave and need, you give us through community. And so I pray you'll give everyone hearing me right now the courage that's needed to take that risk, to just dip their toe in the water, to just experiment for these next 8 weeks, see what it's like, to stop by in the lobby and talk with someone, to go to that website, northshore.church/groups, and see the options. God, I thank you. I thank you for the examples you give us of people who've done this well. I thank you for Gary Minshall. I pray for his family as they grieve. I pray that you'll continue to surround all of us with those kinds of friends in our lives that help us follow you better, to do more than just say we believe something, but to actually do it. So please, Holy Spirit, move in us, knit us together, grow us, Use us together to make a difference for you in this world. We say thank you. In the name of Jesus.